All right, thank you. Thank you. It's so great to see Ambassador Morningstar, who, like Daphne, he's one of my all-time favorite bosses. I had the honor of him succeeding me as well as ambassador to Azerbaijan, and I learned a huge amount from him about how business and governments have to work together if we're going to achieve our full range of energy goals, be it security of supply or our energy transition goals or climate justice goals. We're going to talk about all of that now. And I want to thank Daphne and Grady and Pinar and the whole Atlantic Council team for inviting me back. It's good to be home. I live in Istanbul, but I was part of the Atlantic Council in Turkey and the Global Energy Center at the Atlantic Council for several years, and I'm really happy to be reconnected. But now I'd like to invite up to the stage here. Actually, before I do, I want to encourage everybody to engage on social media. Right, about what you're hearing, what strikes you, respond to whatever we're saying. There are several handles, but the hashtag Clean Energy Outlook is probably the easiest one to remember. Clean Energy Outlook, hashtag Clean Energy Outlook. It's a 45-minute panel, so I'll stop talking so we can get going. We're gonna shoot for about 20 minutes of Q&A at the end. But first, I'd like to welcome to the stage Aida Sitdikova, who's Director for Energy in Eurasia, the Middle East, and Africa, as well as the Sustainable Infrastructure Group at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, EBRD. Neil Cole is joining us from South Africa virtually. Neil, welcome, if you can hear us. Also like to welcome, hello. Hi, Neil, welcome. Great to see you. I'd also like to welcome up to the stage Ms. Ainur Sospanova, who's member of the board of the Kazakh Green Association. She will speak in Russian, but you have your translation devices there. And then I'd like to invite Birol Ergüven, who's the CEO of Limak Energy. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining me, for what I hope will help stretch our minds a bit on a very strange situation, frankly, that we are seeing right now when it comes to coal. We're going to talk about the phasing out of coal and some financing incentives and options to do that. But think back 11 months ago to COP26 in Glasgow. A lot of people complained that not enough was done, but one of the big outcomes was for the first time, right, there was a global commitment to phase out coal. Some countries pledged to do it slower than others. But that was a huge outcome. And then think back to a week ago, when as I was scrolling through the Financial Times, I saw that for the first time ever, the price of a short ton of coal in the United States from the Appalachian Mountains broke $200 for the first time in history. So at this very moment where we're phasing out coal, hopefully, coal has reached the highest price it ever has. And this was even before Russia invaded Ukraine, right? This had begun with the economic recovery after the pandemic, and now prices are going crazy. So I'd like to then maybe ask, I will go with Aida first, yeah? In this crazy situation, how, with coal now in such high demand, how is that influencing your investment decisions, the projects you support at the EBRD? And as a related question, what about natural gas as a transition fuel? It almost didn't make it into the European Union green taxonomy. It made it in with nuclear. How is the EBRD looking at that?
Right. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. I think at EBRD, at the core of our energy strategy is renewables. We have renewables as a sort of daily business, because there's a firm belief that given the 10 years of dramatic cost increases, and despite COVID, and despite supply chain disruptions, and despite the cost hike that we've seen, renewables still are the cheapest option. And this is without factoring in carbon price that is coming in the neighborhood countries, including Turkey, and that will be putting a price of carbon firmly on every kilowatt produced. What we've also seen is that renewables are increasingly do not need subsidies. We saw countries, and well, our countries go from Mongolia to Morocco. By the way, both are highly coal-dependent countries, including Kazakhstan, where Noor is from, in the middle. And we see that those countries are switching, well, have switched to renewables on scale, and switching from the subsidized level of support for renewables like feed-in tariffs, they're switching to auctions. EBRD are running auctions, renewable auctions in 14 countries. So we really believe this is where the market is going. And of course, we will have an overwhelming carbon pricing mantra as CBAM comes online in 2026. So this firmly puts us in the right spot 10 years ago when we stopped financing new coal. But this is when we started scaling up renewables to the tune of over 11 gigawatts today, 7 billion euros. And we continue, we saw the scale up. There are, of course, associated costs of intermittency and system stability and grids reinforcement, but this is still the cheapest form of energy. In terms of gas, yes, indeed, this has been a very disruptive year, as you rightly said. The bank put together a resilience package of support for Ukraine, under which the bank provided financing not only to Ukraine, but to neighboring countries as well. So it's Moldova, Bulgaria, Romania, where we did help the countries with the energy security aspect. And this is the twin challenge. So we face energy security and we face climate change. These are not mutually exclusive, so we see it as going together. Now, gas is clearly, you mentioned EU taxonomy and the role of gas. In some of the countries that I mentioned before, gas is a transition fuel. When the country is 70% coal dominated, even Poland in Europe, it's impossible to start burning something and to switch to, it's minus 30 in Kazakhstan, okay? It's really, gas does have a place, we see it. We are, as a financier, very selective in terms of when we finance gas. It really has to meet certain criteria. There has to be mitigated or low carbon lock-in risk, meaning things like green hydrogen come into place, or any low carbon hydrogen. We're colorblind on that. So it's really, the country has to show that it is on the low carbon pathway to carbon neutrality by mid-century. There has to be the highest standards of doing it. And just as an example, in terms of coal phase out, we are currently looking at a project in Kazakhstan where we replace lignite with gas in the middle of the city, CHP, combined heat and power plant. And this is an example of where gas has a role. Ideally, it happens this side of decade before 2030, so we reach their peaking. We decommission old thermal capacity, and gas has a role of facilitating renewables actually deployment, providing that flexibility to the system. And this is where we are. And just final note, we discussed with Anu earlier, in those coal-rich countries, I don't know if this rich is the right word, the simile I can make is the Stone Age didn't finish because, it's not my phrase, of course, because people ran out of stone. So when Kazakhstan says they have 300 years worth of lignite reserves, this is actually, it doesn't, but Kazakhstan is deploying renewables at scale, moving to auctions, and this is what we want to support.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for being so concise, so clear, so insightful. I'm not going to try to draw out every point, but an underlying crucial point is it makes financial sense now to invest in renewables, right? And so as of 2020, it was more cost effective or cheaper, fancy word, cheaper, to invest in, of course, new renewable electricity generation capacity versus new coal generation. But today, the technologies continue to advance such that investments in infrastructure-heavy renewable projects in some parts of the world are actually cheaper than the operational costs of existing coal-fired power plants. That's powerful. Maybe we'll talk about it later about how there could, is there a tipping point at which there doesn't need to be all sorts of government support and enlightened policies to enable the deployment of renewables. But I'm not quite sure we're there yet. And so I'd like to turn to Neil in South Africa to talk about how governments and the private sector are working together in South Africa. I mentioned COP26, and you are a finance specialist in the Just Energy Transition Partnership, which for South Africa, which grew out of COP26, right? And it's an 8.6, I guess, billion dollar partnership with participation or funding from the European Union, United States, United Kingdom, Germany. That, of course, it provides money for renewable energy projects, but also incentivizes reforms that are needed to make sure that the investment in renewable energy makes sense. And South Africa is a particular point, right? Because there's a sort of a centralized electricity sector under one operator that has historically favored coal rather than renewables. So Neil, could you give us a sense of how the JETP is working?
So thank you very much, and thank you to the Atlantic Council for the opportunity, inviting me, and also opportunity to just hear those insightful insights by earlier speakers. So speaking about JETP and the 8.5 billion, we've, or at least several estimates, put the financing need between 65 billion US and about 95 billion US. So the 8.5 billion, it's somewhat off from that amount that we require, but plays a big push role as a catalytic instrument, and also I think illustrates the various types of financing instruments that we're going to require to achieve that range that I spoke of, the 65 billion to US 95 billion. We will be taking a JET partnership investment plan to COP27, and obviously in that plan we will provide more specifics on the financing needs required over the next 5 years. What we do know is that we're going to have to access various sources, financing instruments, and also disbursement channels. And what the IPG offer from the International Partnership Group does is that it provides several opportunities to leverage the offer and international funding from multilateral development banks, development finance institutions, both local as well as international. Also, the private sector is going to have an important role here. Philanthropic foundations have also been participating in some of those discussions that we've been having. So that 8.5 provides that catalytic role into different types of financing, and also a blend of financing that we know we're going to require. The offer is, I think, a microcosm of the kinds of financing. So it comprises of grants, concessional and commercial funding. And this funding is mainly geared towards the decommissioning of coal plants, funding alternative job opportunities in coal mining areas, and the deployment of renewable energy. But we're also aware that the financing that South Africa seeks will need to be affordable, it would need to be sustainable, and also enable the country to efficiently manage the decommissioning of coal-fired power stations in a way that strengthen and expand also investments in our transmission grid and also our distribution networks. And I mean, as you allude to, we have a monopoly in our energy supply. It's a monopoly utility company that owns our coal-fired power stations. It owns our transmission grid and also the that is also going to be important in how we're going to secure the financing for the transition to renewables, because it is about decommissioning those coal-fired power stations, strengthening the transmission grid, and also taking care of what has been neglected distribution. We also, including in our plan, and the next less than a month, the plan should be made public. We're also looking for additional funding that will be essential for the justice components, right? I mean, some of the speakers earlier spoke about this as well. And there's a particular type of financing that's going to be required for those justice components. I mean, it's going to have to come in the form of grants.
Neil, you're breaking up heavily.
Targeted at Oh, I apologize.
It's not your fault.
I hope this is maybe if I maybe switch off my video for a short bit.
Okay.
Should we see if that works?
Sure. And now the transmission's a little bit better. We frightened it, but please keep going, Neil.
Okay, I'm going to finish this first point. So I was speaking about this additional funding that will be essential for the justice components, and this is going to have to be through grants, concessional lending, in order to prepare the social safety nets that we believe we need to put in place, and also to begin that regional diversification efforts. Workers in the coal sector would need retirement packages, as well as retraining, and also building up of new skills for the renewable energy sector. So what we have been doing, and coming to the point that you made about working in partnership with the private sector, what we have been doing since the offer was made in Glasgow is that we were meeting with DFIs of the partner countries, so DFC in the US, BII in the UK, AFD France, KfW Germany, GIZ Germany, etc. We've also been meeting with multilateral development banks, the World Bank Group in particular, the African Development Bank. We've been engaging with the local private investor community, and this is to get a sense of the appetite for the supply of financing and the type of financing, and also how best to start thinking about where we have an oversupply of financing and in what areas we may have an undersupply. And then this has been some of our preliminary findings.
Neil, sorry. Yes. I just want to, what you've done now, you have laid out for us the reality that this energy transition and the phase out of coal is going to be a lot more complicated than simply getting a lot of money put up to finance projects. I mean, there's all the question of social justice, but of climate justice, which we'll come to, I hope, if we have time in the end, retraining people from the coal sector and reinvesting. And so, Neil, if it's okay, I'm going to pick up on that. Well, I just wanted to make the point also that why South Africa? Of course, South Africa is a hugely important country. It's also the only country on the African continent that is categorized as industrialized. And it's the seventh largest producer of coal in the world and sixth largest exporter. And I think with that huge coal sector, Neil, there's a similarity to Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan, as we were talking about before this panel, is 70% dependent on coal. And it is just right behind South Africa in terms of being a world leader in coal production. So I wanted to ask Ainur Saspanova, in Kazakhstan, well, the last time we had one of these Atlantic Council clean energy sessions before COVID, a big topic was what you mentioned, Aida, the transitioning or investment actually plans to convert coal-fired Kazakhstani power plants to natural gas, with gas, again, as you were saying, Aida, as a transition fuel. Could you update on this? What has happened in the last couple of years on that? I mean, there's been a lot that's happened in Kazakhstan, especially last January with a new government. How is that transition going? Not only from coal to gas, but also from coal to renewables.
Слышно меня?
Do you hear me? Yes, we hear you. Thank you very much for your question. And first of all, I would like to say that the policy of Kazakhstan regarding climate is only strengthening nowadays. And during UN meeting, our government has stated carbon neutrality that will be reached before 2060, and it increases the pressure on energy sector in our country because more than 30% of CO2 is produced by energy sector in our country. At the moment, we should understand it clearly. What should we do to reach carbon neutrality? Last year, our Ministry of Energy has developed an energy balance until 2035. And in the framework of this, we plan before 2035 to install 70 megawatt of new installed capacity, and there will be wind power plants. Those are big networks. Then 2 gigawatts of hydro power plants, and most of it will be gas, natural gas generation. By 2035, we will decrease the coal generation by 40%, and it will allow us to reach the results that we are planning to reach by 2060. And what are we doing at the moment to make sure that the balance of 2035 will be reached? And what do we do to make it a reality? I will give you a few examples of our cases. During the summer of this year, we have our Ministry of Energy has conducted tenders, and we have 1.2 gigawatts which are allocated to be working in a manure regime, and we plan to procure install capacity for 15 years. And one of the projects of Kızılorda region is won by a Turkish company. The second one is the subsidiary company of Samruk Kazana and Kazakgaz, a state-owned company. And by doing so, we have ensured supply of natural gas. It is very important because there are many discussions related to this issue, because people are not sure whether we have enough natural gas in our country. We can see that our country, our government has made an unprecedented step where they switched from gas export to internal usage of the natural gas. And speaking about renewable energy sources, we can say that our association, Kazakh Green, together with the administration of the president, speak every day and discuss how renewable energy should be taking part in the energy mix of the country. And as of today, we are not speaking separately energy sector and renewable energy sources as it was before 2020. At the moment, renewable energy sources is an important part of energy balance, and renewable energy sources affect the system operator, network companies, and all the generation of the electricity in our country, including those the generation from coal as well. At the moment, 2 gigawatts is the volume of our renewable energy sources, and this year, Ministry of Energy has announced a tender for 690 megawatts, and two facilities will be wind power plants, thanks to the support of EBRD. And at the end of the November, this we will have other tenders related to renewable energy sources. And I think it will be very interesting. This is what we are doing at the moment, but we shouldn't forget that the coal generation is also an issue related to social problems, not only tariff-related issue, but also of employment, because coal generation is employment not only of coal production companies, but also for coal power plants. What are we going to do with those workers that are working at these workplaces in the future? We will have to answer these questions too.
I don't know if you speak Russian, so I just want to assure you that you just heard a description of powerful vision that the government of Kazakhstan has, working together with NGOs to reduce the dependence on coal from 70% to 40%. And there are a whole series of specific investments happening, including with a Turkish company. We're going to come to one right now, not the same one. But Ainur was also making some points similar to yours with regard to the fact that this transition and phasing out of coal isn't simply an investment issue, but it's an issue that is social in nature and has so many social costs and opportunities that need to be taken care of as well as part of the policy mix. So we've heard very similar approaches and visions now. And the EBRD has been so helpful as well in financing this. It's not really a pilot project, it's a big project to convert from a coal-fired power plant to natural gas as a transition fuel. And underlying all this is the need to have a mix of energy, as you were saying, Ainur, getting less and less coal, but also natural gas and renewables as well. So I'd like to turn then, if I can, now to Birol, who's, as we said, the CEO of Limak Energy here in Turkey, but not only in Turkey. I mean, you guys have presence throughout the Balkans, and what's really interesting to me about Limak Energy is that you've already developed a mix in your investment portfolio that includes everything. Except, I guess, nuclear, but you've got coal generating, maybe small modular is coming, but coal and hydro and wind and solar and natural gas. And here in Turkey, there have been incentives, we know, to move into the renewables sector. Could you give us a sense of, from your perspective as the CEO, what has been driving your investment decisions and how realistic in Turkey, with a big indigenous coal industry as well, is the phase out from coal here? Thanks, Birol.
Thank you very much. Actually, as a private company, we are the ones who execute all the necessary work at site. There are regulations, laws, incentives. At the end of the day, actually, we are planning and designing our way. If you go to years, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, there was a big plan in Turkey to privatize the energy market. Privatization actually came with liberalization, a free market economy, especially in energy, because it was all state-owned companies. This is a big change from what we have now and what it was many years ago. In the original plan, the final actual goal was to form vertically integrated companies. That means you have electricity distribution, retail, generation, and also trading. That was our ultimate goal. So we looked at the issue like a national dispatch center. That means we have customers, millions of customers, and we have to have a baseload energy resource. And we have to have flexible energy generation sources to balance the consumption. So based on what we have at the time in the beginning, we had electricity distribution company, we had hydros, but we were missing with baseload energy generation companies. Instead of actually investing from scratch, like building entirely new utilities, we decided to go privatization of thermal power plants. That means already up and running state-owned companies. So what we had at that time was Hamitabad Thermal Power Plant, SECGT, natural gas-fired power plant. Very old, very, actually at that time, inefficient. We took it over and we immediately put new gensets, which were very state-of-the-art, the highest efficiency. And Turkey needed, at the time, that electricity a lot, because it is the first connection point from Europe to Turkey. Plus, it is actually feeding all European side of Istanbul and Turkey, let's say, Thrace region. So I believe it was one of the best decisions at that time to invest such a up and running CCGT. Now it is still one of the key electricity generation resource in European part of Turkey. So when I look at our history, we have decided a clear plan, what we can do. But at the same time, we have chosen certain opportunities. So privatization was a good opportunity because starting from scratch is really very, very difficult to advance in the construction. After CCGT investment, there was another opportunity. It was local lignite-fired power plant in west part of Turkey, which is actually essential part of electricity generation system in Turkey. There are two separate lignite-fired power plants in that part. And also, we are doing actually mining works. We are actually getting our lignite from the soil, which is a big operation. If you look at last 30 years, yes, these two set of electricity generation companies are key players. And to be honest, they are still key, especially in the west part of Turkey. But if you look at what we have invested in electricity generation as a greenfield project, they are all renewable. We invested hydropower plants. We are one of the largest hydropower plant capacity holder in Turkey. We built and we operate our own hydropower plant. It is more than 1.3 gigawatt. We invested in solar, we invested in geothermal, and we are still searching for opportunities to invest in solar. That means as a private company, actually we have chosen a clear goal for investment in energy. As a vertically integrated electricity company, it was a complete picture. But it was also possible for us to invest some other portfolios, which is not related with this target. And many companies actually did it without seeing the whole picture. That's another way of investing. We are not in that group, to be honest. And I believe our first approach was quite right one, but our market now is a little bit different, I can say that, and you know the latest situation.
Well, thank you, Birol. Yeah, it's actually another take on your point, Aida, how it's making sense. It's making commercial sense now to invest in a diversified way. Yes, it's the right thing to do. Yes, we're committed to saving the planet, and it's making commercial sense. And so I had a bunch of questions, more, but a lot of them have been answered already. So I would like to turn to the audience, but before I do, to start off the question period, I wanted to throw out a whole other topic. I originally intended to ask Neil about climate justice, but it's appropriate for everybody. With Kazakhstan, a middle-income country making a transition, Turkey also, not a developing country, a very developed industrial base, but still, like South Africa, an industrialized country, but it's we in the United States and in Europe and China that have eaten up so much of the carbon budget already, right? There's only so much left. And so there's a powerful argument about climate justice that it should be the countries, especially lesser developed, unindustrialized countries, that should enjoy or have access to the balance of the carbon budget. So I guess well, this is for any panelist. But Neil, why I thought of this with you is because when I think about the JETP and how important coal is, like for Kazakhstan to your economy, and as I said, South Africa is the only country designated as industrialized on the African continent. It seems almost as if you all in South Africa, with your partners in JETP, have decided that from a perspective of climate justice, maybe South Africa has a special mission to reduce its coal intensity. And so I'd like you to react to that, but everybody as well. And I know too, you also talked about how the government of Kazakhstan seems to have the same perspective. And anybody else, please, we have people with microphones, running the microphones. If you have any questions, just show me your hand. And okay, Madam Minister will be next, please. Neil, you want to go? Or?
Yes, let me start and maybe switch off my video so that the audio is as good a quality as it can be. So yes, I think it is an ambitious plan that we have set ourselves in South Africa, because we are doing this alongside, being the most carbon-intensive developing economy in the world. We're also the most unequal country in the world, with over 30% of the population being unemployed, with youth unemployment exceeding close to 65%. The economy is fragile as we embark on this ambitious plan. We've seen growth rates decline. But given this context, I think there are three risks that we are taking into account, and that's guiding this mission that South Africa is undertaking. And we see it as three climate risks. The first is obviously the physical risk, where the IPCC report shows that climate warming and its effects will proceed twice as fast on the African continent. We're going to see this in the form of rapid desertification, bush encroachment, extreme seaboard storms, and more frequent and intense fires and floods, as we experienced very recently in South Africa. So that's first, I mean, the climate risk is the physical risk. The second is the social risk. So with these very high levels of inequality, unemployment, and poverty, the impacts of climate change for the poor are particularly severe. It's going to require, as you reminded us, it's going to require social safety nets that will build resilience in vulnerable communities. Fossil fuel intensive and coal-based economy creates large challenges in the scale of the energy transition. And then the third and last risk that I would refer to that is driving us, I mean, on this mission is this point that I think we've been making, and that is the transition risk. And these relate to the substantive risk that is associated with decarbonizing the coal sector, especially for South Africa. So let me stop there and allow others to come in, seeing that you've opened this up to the rest of the panelists and also the audience.
Thanks, Neil. Would anybody else like to comment?
Да, я хотела тоже.
Yes, I also would like maybe in another direction say some words about this. Now in our country we have very interesting things happening when our institutions of this sector, metallurgic sector, understand that they have to decrease their coal usage and become more green and improve their policies. They are still moving in the direction of decarbonization and using renewables. So here we have demand from energy consumers, and from this point of view, our metallurgic institutions and companies who are the providers of this energy on another markets, they understand that have huge risks in the future in front of other companies. In the same way, our national companies also develop their own strategy of decarbonization to access or get investments in their projects, which they provide to foreign investors. But first of all, every foreign investor will ask them, what is your green policy? So this is this scene that gives us hope that not only governments have the policy on pushing decarbonization, but also that organizations and companies themselves have to take initiative and carry out works inside the organization and inside the field. So this is new approaches that we have during the last 2-3 years in our country.
I know mentioned risks, and those risks are seen not just by the companies themselves, but by lenders. So in terms of whether we finance a carbon, less of a carbon or more of a carbon is actually impacting the balance sheets of lenders. And these are the risks that are increasingly being factored in. So coal, that's why new coal is off the limits. There is this thing of just transition. Without getting into the debate on climate justice that you mentioned, we do notice that there is a finite carbon budget. And of course, I mean, the countries, developing countries, are at the crossroads whether they go in the long-term perspective with the sustainability agenda and thinking long-term and thinking of lenders who would or would not be financing fossil fuel assets, or they select a green trajectory, and which is ultimately more economical in the end.
Well said. Yeah, that's. I have a friend, a dear friend, who runs a European refiner, and he said it's impossible to plan any investment decisions right now unless you take into account all of these climate issues, because you cannot get the financing. We have a couple questions. Ana Palacio, your hand was up first. Yeah, and please, yeah. Oh, is there a microphone here? And everybody.
My question is centered in Africa, not on just transition from coal, but those that are burning whatever they find, and they don't have access to electricity. And I will quote, this is the cover of the Nairobi Business Monthly of August. Africa, fossil energy, a right and a necessity. Increasingly, African leaders are saying that they want generation. generation with fossil, because they need baseload and electricity. So you have mentioned a pilot, fantastic project in Kazakhstan, replacing generation of coal by generation of gas. Why don't start financing generation with gas? Because this would help people get electricity and at the same time would help the planet, because the people that do not have electricity just contaminate a lot by burning whatever they have besides this justice you mentioned about.
And that was just for everybody, that's, you know her already, Ana Palacio, former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Spain. And there's a follow-up question by the other Ana sitting right next to her, Ana Birol from Romania's Atomic Energy. Any other Anas that would like to add?
Thank you so much. Actually, it's complementing what Ana Palacio was saying and going to you. When you are considering to, well, some countries are considering to close the coal plants and are putting and considering heavily to put new technologies such as SMRs. Why are you not financing, considering to really financing those new technologies? Because now you have the taxonomy. Of course, it's upsetting because as we speak, one country officially, Austria, is attacking the taxonomy. They don't have necessarily the grounds to win, but we go with the motions. But coming back to my questions, as you are pledging to go for these new, technologies or helping the decarbonization, why, when it's closing one coal plant, why not financing the SMRs? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm being put on spot here.
You just go. In Romania, where we are going with the SMR with NewScale, actually we are, the site is on a previous plant, coal plant.
Coal mine, yeah.
Sure, yeah. No, I mean, and it is low carbon, you're right. I would encourage you to talk to a colleague of mine who's actually in the audience, because Romania, unfortunately, is not in my, but what I think it's ultimately the decision of the government. You're right, EBRD has been traditionally out of nuclear, because this is a very sovereign decision. We have not been financing large or any new nuclear, but it's something that potentially has a place in the energy mix of the future if it's commercially viable, safe, and clean. So I think on Romania, I know there was
because we know that in nuclear, for example, you need the long-term planning, and financing is right bang there from the very beginning. So do not particularize, please, on Romania, because we are we have the financial support, including from the government. That wasn't my point. My point was, as financial institutions, why are you not considering to actually finance from the very beginning?
Yeah, you made the point. I think overall, nuclear has been. It was expensive, it was lengthy. SMR, I mean, I don't want to particularize Romania, but SMR in any other country, we have not been tabled a proposal, certainly not in our geography, from Mongolia to Morocco. We see large nuclears sort of being considered, but if it's tested, if it's bankable, if it's the government's decision to go ahead, who knows where we will be? Ask Zhegash where he will be in Eastern Europe. But back to Ana Palacio's question on Africa and people burning, and basically the continent contributing a minuscule part of emissions, not enjoying the economic growth, and when they actually want, they want to achieve the economic state of development, they think fossil fuel is the way to get there. But if we frame the question a little bit differently and see that African continent can be a locomotive of global decarbonization, with all the resources that they have there, we're just in the North Africa and a little bit of Middle East, but the whole continent offers enormous potential of doing things with probably less of fossil fuel and looking decentralized generation, again, addressing energy poverty in Africa. So it's a debate. It's a debate, I agree. It's not an easy debate, just transition is not an easy debate. Yeah.
Minister Palacio is saying, for those who couldn't hear, there's an African friend of hers, a minister, who says, we're happy to decarbonize, but let us carbonize first. So that was the whole point of my question, exactly. Thank you. We have 3 minutes left. I'm looking for any other questions. I wanted to pick up just for a moment on what Anna was talking about, the other Anna from Romania. Your agency has an incredibly innovative set of ideas on how to use small modular nuclear reactors in old coal mines to generate heat that then vaporizes the residual water in the coal mine, and then just drill down into that new steam, and you can power turbines. So you can turn an abandoned coal mine into a power plant with zero emissions. It's amazingly innovative, and I know it makes commercial sense. So that's very exciting, to me at least. Any other questions? I have unlimited number. I will ask one more then, going back to domestic politics, and I touched upon it. South Africa, Neil, Ainur, Kazakhstan, and Turkey also, Birol, have powerful and important domestic coal lobbies, if you will, or actors, and Poland is the same. How is that playing out? I know from my service, I'm on the board of Turkas Petrol. We also are an energy investor. We were thinking about Turkish lignite a few years ago, and now that's probably not doable given ESG concerns. So I welcome any of your responses on the influence.
Maybe I could come in very quickly.
Yeah, Neil, please.
Thank you very much. So interesting debate that's taking place. We're aware of the coal lobby, and there's certainly a presence. At the moment, it is largely focused in terms of the media and also influencing policy decisions. And that's a democracy, and that kind of contestation within a democracy is appreciated. We just hope that it remains at the point of policy lobbying and doesn't go to anything a bit more nefarious. I want to come in on this point about Africa and how Africa, whether it is a transition or maybe more directly, what is the energy mix for Africa. And I think we always need to remind ourselves that the continent has 54 countries. Each of the countries are endowed with different minerals. Some it's going to make sense for them to continue using fossil fuels going forward. But if we think about Africa, maybe flip it around and think about it as an energy insecurity situation where a country like Nigeria has had its transmission grid failing almost 5 times this year. There's a need for investment in generation, and the challenge to be posed then is, how do you build up as an African country? How do you build up your generation capacity? And if the renewable energy is becoming cheaper form of generation, maybe for African countries, it's not a transition to renewables, but a building up of our generation capacity with renewables. Thank you.
Thanks, Neil. And I'm afraid we're out of time. If somebody has a burning comment they wish to make, please do. Otherwise, it's a beautiful note to end on. Would you like? Ainur?
Я буквально один тезис скажу, что
I would like to say only one thesis for the recent years. From 2009, I'm working in energy sector, and at that time, coal lobby was very strong, and the decarbonization politics was not going on. But today, this is such an evolution process, and we have such a number of weak sides in our infrastructure, and we have to improve all of that to decarbonize our energy sector. But one big advantage that we have this year is energy lack is because of energy renewables. So introduction of energy renewables is a positive moment in Kazakhstan.
Thank you all. Thank you for such thoughtful, again, focused, succinct contributions. It was an honor to be with you. Thank you. And Stay put, everybody, because we're about to start the next panel. It's the role of the energy transition in Eastern Mediterranean energy security, actually one of my favorites. And one of my favorite people, Harry Tsimitsas, whom I saw a week ago in Cyprus, is going to be the moderator. I welcome you to the stage as we exit. Thank you.